Let me start again. Beep. Hi, Terry here, and welcome to Times Gone Tech. So today is part C, the third part in my video series on how to make percussion caps for antique muzzle loaders using my TO24 priming compound. So yeah, I did this all in one day. I set up and I made the sensitizer, tetracene, in the morning. Part A video. Then I did the part B video early that afternoon, making the primary initiating charge. That would be the INAP, the isopropyl nickel aminoguanidine perchlorate. And then that evening, I sat down and I filmed the third part, part C, which was this part, only it was different because it's a different video, in which I actually sat down and I made percussion caps. And I ended up making a couple hundred, made close to 300 percussion caps. And yeah, I went and published part A, and then a week later I published part B, as you've seen. And then I came ready to publish part C yesterday. And I looked it over one more time just to make sure, I didn't forget anything or everything was okay. And it was really incredibly boring. There was nothing in it you haven't already seen me do more than a couple of times. I've already showed you how I punch caps. I've already showed you how I mix the chemicals together on the sheet of paper and load them into the primers. It's all the same. It doesn't matter if it's TO24, Primol, EC20, I mean, whatever you're using, H48, it's the same procedure. There's nothing in that video different. So I decided I'm just going to scrap it out. I'm going to keep it. I'm just not going to publish it. What I'm going to do instead is something a little different. I want to take this time to wrap up this three-part series on making percussion caps with TO24. And I'm going to shut down the video series itself pretty much. I'm wrapping it up and closing it down. I've taken this about as far as I want to go with it right now. Of course, over the course of the next, this season, next season, maybe as updates happen, I might publish them. But anyway, I'm going to be shutting this series down, moving on to another subject, which I think you'll find maybe, hopefully, just as interesting, maybe even more so. So I'm going to talk a bit in this video, closing all this down, about the different variations that I tried, the different versions of formulas. I want to bring up a few health and safety issues that might possibly be of a concern for some viewers thinking about trying this formula or any other kind of homemade primer. And maybe some tips, advice, tricks that I might have learned along the way, some lessons learned right along with that, and where I'm going to be taking this maybe in the future. So, starting formulas. Okay, the classic formula, I guess if you want to call it that, although TO24 hasn't been around really long enough to have a classic, but if there was one, this would be it. It is, and let's say we're making a 1 gram batch, it would be 300 milligrams of potassium perchlorate, 220 milligrams of INAP, 160 milligrams of ground glass, 120 milligrams of powdered aluminum, 80 milligrams of sulfur, 80 milligrams of barium nitrate. And as a side note, the barium nitrate I think is optional. I'm using it, but if you don't have any barium nitrate and you don't want to buy any, don't worry about it. You can probably skip without it. But anyway, I used 80 milligrams of barium nitrate and then 40 milligrams of tetracene as the sensitizer. Okay, that's the classic formula. Now, I started thinking, okay, that's great. What happens if I don't have a scale? What if somebody wants to make up some TO24 and they don't have a scale that measures in milligrams? Can they still use it? And if so, how would they measure it? So I started thinking about that little scoop that came with the Primol kit. You've got a large scoop and a small scoop, right? So I worked out the following formula, and this works. Now, it doesn't replicate the ratios exactly, but when you figure the specific gravity, the density of each of the materials, it gets you pretty close into the ballpark. And it works too. It works pretty well, actually. So that formula that you can use just taking a scoop or any kind of a measuring device you want to use, it would be, actually I got two of them, two versions. The first one was 2 large scoops of potassium perchlorate, 1 large and then 1 small scoop of INAP, and then 1 small scoop of everything else. And that actually worked out pretty well. I had a couple of misfires out of several hundred caps, which is not bad for a homemade percussion cap. So then I did another one. I bumped it up just a little bit and got 0 malfunctions with it. And for that one, I did 3 large scoops of potassium perchlorate, 2 large scoops of INAP, and then 1 small scoop of everything else. And basically all we're doing is putting more oxidizer and more of the main initiating charge into each cap. And that one worked out pretty well, actually. Then I started thinking about removing the potassium perchlorate, because chlorates and perchlorates, when they burn, they produce chloride salts as a byproduct, in this case, potassium chloride, which is a very popular salt substitute for people with high blood pressure, but it doesn't do the insides of your gun any good. It's actually very corrosive. And you go to the range and you shoot a couple of cylinders of this, when you get home, you really need to clean it out like immediately or it's going to start rusting. And that's true with any primer, primol also, that uses any kind of chlorate or perchlorate. So I started thinking about removing the potassium perchlorate. Now, INAP is a perchlorate, isopropyl nickel aminoguanidine perchlorate. So I can't remove all the perchlorates unless I go to something like a lead styphnate, which I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but you can do that also. But if we're going to use INAP, it's going to have some perchlorate, but the potassium perchlorate and the INAP perchlorate make up over half of the mixture. So that's a lot of chloride salt left over. So if I could take out the potassium perchlorate, that eliminates like 30% of the mixture right there, 30% of the chlorides. It takes out close to half of the total mixture, and then close to half of the total perchlorates, because you got 30% potassium perchlorate and then 22% INAP. So you take out 30%, you're taking out half of the perchlorates from the mixture there. So the formula on that was, and again, I used the scoops just to keep this in range with people who maybe don't have a scale. And with that, I did 2 large scoops of barium nitrate, 2 large scoops of INAP, and then 1 small scoop of everything else. And it worked out fairly decent, except I started having some higher misfire rates. So I went to another version, which was 2 scoops barium nitrate, 2 scoops INAP, 2 large scoops barium nitrate, 2 large scoops INAP, 1 large scoop tetrazine, 1 small scoop ground glass, no sulfur, no aluminum. And that's been working fine as well. I haven't tested it out as thoroughly as the others, but the initial testing shows it's working pretty good. Now, here's the thing about that. Whenever I add sulfur and aluminum, I start getting occasional misfires. When I take the sulfur and the aluminum out, those occasional misfires stopped, at least so far. I've tried tetrazine by itself. It doesn't work. It's very inconsistent, very haphazard, hit or miss. I've tried tetrazine with ground glass. I've tried it with aluminum. I've tried it with sulfur and aluminum, just a lot of different formulas, okay? And none of them work. Tetrazine by itself just is not powerful enough. I've tried INAP by itself, and it's too insensitive. It needs the kick from that tetrazine. So the two of those have to work together. Okay, here's my takeaway from that. There are a lot of formulas, a lot of variations on this formula with these materials that work. There's only a few that actually don't work. So it isn't that you've got to do, X 0.5 milligrams of this, or take that little scoop from the primol and scrape it off nice and flush on the top. No, you can eyeball it. You can guess. You can just kind of mix this stuff together, keeping in mind that you need an oxidizer, barium nitrate, potassium chlorate, whatever, some other material. You need an oxidizer. You need a primary initiating charge. That's the main bang factor in the formula. You need some kind of fuel, and you need a sensitizer to get everything started, get it kick-started. As long as you keep that in mind, there are a lot of formulas that work. So it's all to play for, really. I mean, you can just kind of take this, you can change it, you can take out the barium nitrate, replace it with something else. You can add a little more of this, take out a little of that, and you can tweak it and improve it and fine tune it and make it your own. That's the thing about it. So let's move on to health hazards issues. Of course, barium nitrate decays into barium oxide, and there is some risk, some concern among some people about barium toxicity. It is toxic in large amounts, but barbecuing or running charcoal in your barbecue grill to grill your burger with also has byproducts is toxic fumes. Gives off carbon monoxide. So there's toxic byproducts in pretty much anything that burns. Barium nitrate has been known to be toxic in large amounts with some people. There is a idea among the INAP that nickel, when the INAP decays, when it burns, might form some nickel carbonyl, which is very toxic. But the thing to keep in mind is there's very little nickel in the mix. There's only one nickel atom in the entire molecule, the structure. So there's very little nickel there. We're not using very much in each cap anyway. It's going to be incredibly small amounts. It has a half-life of 40 seconds, right? So look, unless you're shooting a machine gun in the trunk of a car using this stuff as the primer, or really any primer actually, because lead styphnate, there's lead in commercial primers, right? But unless you're doing that, I don't really think it's a problem. And if you are, you should probably be wearing a respirator regardless of what other kind of primer you're using, and maybe like earplugs and a goggles or something. But really, you should not be shooting a machine gun in the trunk of a car anyway. Okay, I mean, that's kind of like in the duh category, right? So moving on, lessons learned, tips and tricks. The biggest advice that I would have for you is make small batches. Don't make up a lot of this stuff and store it. First of all, storing explosives in the United States is illegal without an approved storage facility, which means usually steel reinforced concrete bunker. I don't happen to have one of those, and unless you do, you probably don't want to think about making up a lot of this stuff and storing it, all right? I work in small batches, a gram at a time, sometimes even less. I make it when I need it, and I use it all when I make it. And I guess the philosophy behind that is, and if you've seen the Mel Gibson movie Patriot, you know where this is coming from. Work small. How would that work? Work small, lose small, I guess. Yeah, we're talking about if you have an accident, it will be a small accident. Yeah, so if you're making small batches and you have an accident, it will be a small accident rather than a large accident. The other thing that goes along with that, which I would highly recommend keeping in mind, is these are explosives. They are sensitive to impact, friction, heat, some of them to electrostatic discharge. Keep that in mind when you're working with it. And just follow some common sense safety protocols on that. And moving forward, I'm just going to go to the range and shoot my gun. I mean, I'm pretty well done with my experimenting. And if I get an idea, or if a viewer has a good idea, I might try it. But I'm not going to worry about it. I'm calling this video series closed. And I'm going to, like I said, I've got about 300 caps put up. Now that'll last me the rest of this year into next year. So, and I'm almost out of guanidine bicarbonate anyway. So I'm just not going to worry about it. I'm not going to do any more experimenting right now. Um, if I do, it might be with making up some lead styphnate to replace the INAP with the lead styphnate. Or there is a lead-free version that Federal is working on, if they haven't released it already, that uses bismuth and nitrocellulose with barium nitrate. So I might be working on something like that. You know, get away from the INAP, get away from the perchlorates, get away from the nickel, get away from the lead, and go with something that's probably going to turn out to be just as toxic, bismuth. So with barium nitrate, of course, as well. So thanks for watching this video. I'm presenting this one unedited, just so you can see how I tend to ramble. Thank God for editing, huh? And yeah, I'll be back with a new subject, a new series. I'm going to be calling it Energetic History. You can fill the blanks in on that yourself for now. And yeah, I'm going to take a couple of weeks off, and I will be back. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.